The children's hospice in rural Montana sits like a beacon of hope against endless wheat fields. But for Sarah Chen, it's become her final battlefield. With only days left to live, this former horse whisperer faces an impossible decision that would sound insane to anyone else: entrusting her 5-year-old daughter Emma to Moon Whisper, a massive white stallion she rescued years ago from an abandoned circus. Sarah's trembling fingers pressed against the cool window glass as she watched Emma giggle in the meadow below. The child's dark hair caught the morning sunlight as she ran in circles around Moon Whisper, her tiny hands reaching up to touch his velvet muzzle. The stallion stood perfectly still, a mountain of white patience, allowing the little girl to braid wildflowers into his flowing mane. "Mrs. Chen, you should be resting." Nurse Patricia's voice carried gentle concern as she entered the room carrying a breakfast tray. "How can I rest when I'm about to leave her alone in this world?" Sarah's voice cracked like autumn leaves. She'd lost 40 pounds since the diagnosis 6 months ago, her once strong frame now fragile as rice paper. But her eyes still held the fierce determination that had helped her communicate with troubled horses throughout her career. Patricia set the tray down and joined Sarah at the window. Below, Moon Whisper had lowered his great head, allowing Emma to whisper secrets into his ear. The horse's ears swiveled forward with an attention that seemed almost human. "That's quite a bond they have," Patricia observed. Sarah nodded, remembering the night 3 years ago when she'd found Moon Whisper trapped in a burning trailer behind a failing circus. The other performers had fled, leaving the animals behind. While firefighters saved the lions and elephants, Sarah had risked everything to reach the terrified stallion. The moment their eyes met through the smoke, she'd known he was different. Special. "He was born in Tibet," Sarah whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "The circus owner told me his mother was struck by lightning during a blood moon, but survived long enough to give birth. The local monks said he was blessed, that he could heal hearts the way some horses heal bones." Patricia's eyebrows rose skeptically, but she'd worked in hospice long enough to know that dying people often found comfort in unusual beliefs. "I used to think it was nonsense," Sarah continued, "until I watched him work with Emma after her father died in that car accident 2 years ago. She didn't speak for 3 months, just screamed and cried. But Moon Whisper, he knew exactly what to do." Through the window, they watched as Emma climbed onto a wooden fence post, her arms stretched wide. Without any command or encouragement, Moon Whisper moved closer, positioning himself perfectly so the child could slide onto his broad back. No saddle, no bridle, just complete trust between species. "Sarah, we need to discuss the arrangements." Patricia's voice grew serious. "Your sister in Seattle is willing to take Emma, but she's expressed concerns about maintaining a horse, especially one that size." Sarah's jaw tightened. Linda meant well, but she lived in a downtown apartment and thought horses were dirty, dangerous creatures. She'd never understand that separating Emma from Moon Whisper would be like tearing away half the child's soul. "There has to be another way," Sarah murmured, watching as horse and rider moved across the meadow in perfect harmony. Emma's laughter carried on the wind like music, the sound growing fainter as they approached the tree line. "The state won't approve placement with a horse as the primary caregiver," Patricia said gently. "You know that." But Sarah's mind was already working, formulating a plan that would seem impossible to anyone who hadn't witnessed Moon Whisper's gifts firsthand. The old Henderson Ranch bordered the hospice property, abandoned for 5 years since the owner's death. 40 acres of grassland with a sturdy barn and a house that needed work but had good bones. "What if someone were to buy that property?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Someone who understood Emma's needs?" "Sarah, you don't have that kind of money." "No, but I have something more valuable." Sarah's hand moved to the wooden box on her nightstand, containing papers that documented Moon Whisper's bloodline. a lineage that traced back to the sacred horses of Tibetan monasteries. Horse collectors would pay fortunes for such provenance, but Sarah had never been interested in money, until now. "I need you to make some calls," Sarah said, turning from the window with renewed purpose. "And I need to speak with Emma tonight. There are things she needs to understand about Moonwhisper, things that will help her survive what's coming." Outside, girl and horse had disappeared into the shadows of the pine forest, but Sarah wasn't worried. Moonwhisper would bring her daughter home safely, just as he would protect her long after Sarah's voice fell silent forever. The hospital room felt smaller with each passing hour, as if the walls were slowly closing in on the last precious moments Sarah had left. Through the window, she could see the parking lot where her rusty Honda sat, Emma's car seat still buckled in the back, a painful reminder of all the ordinary days she would never have again. Emma sat cross-legged on the narrow hospital bed, her dark curls catching the afternoon light as she carefully arranged her collection of smooth stones. She had found them during their walks through Millbrook Park, back when Sarah still had the strength to chase her daughter down winding paths. Now, each stone had become a treasure, polished by small fingers and assigned elaborate backstories that only a 5-year-old could imagine. "This one is a sleeping dragon," Emma whispered, holding up a flat grey stone with veins of white running through it. "And this one is a piece of the moon that fell down." Sarah's chest tightened, not from the cancer this time, but from the overwhelming love that seemed to grow stronger even as her body grew weaker. How could she explain to this beautiful, innocent child that dragons and fallen moon pieces would soon be the only magic left in her world? The social worker had visited again that morning. Miss Patterson, a kind woman with tired eyes who spoke in gentle tones about foster care and temporary arrangements that they both knew might not be temporary at all. Sarah's parents had died in a car accident when Emma was just 2, and her ex-husband had vanished the moment the word cancer entered their vocabulary. There was no one left, no one human, anyway. Sarah closed her eyes and let her mind drift to the forest at the edge of town, where ancient oaks whispered secrets older than the settlement itself. She had first seen him there 3 months ago, during one of her late-night drives when sleep eluded her and the hospital walls felt too confining. At first, she thought the pain medication was causing hallucinations, a white stallion, luminous as starlight, standing perfectly still among the shadows. But Emma had seen him too. "Mama," Emma had said during their last visit to the forest, "the pretty horse is sad. He wants to help us." Children saw things differently, Sarah knew. They hadn't yet learned to dismiss magic as impossible, hadn't been taught that the world operated only within the boundaries of logic and reason. When Emma spoke to the stallion in her sing-song voice, he listened with an attention that seemed almost human. When she offered him dandelions, he accepted them with a gentle nod that made Sarah's heart ache with possibility. The nurses thought she was in denial, making up fairy tales to avoid facing reality. Dr. Morrison had increased her anxiety medication and suggested grief counseling, but Sarah knew what she had witnessed in those twilight meetings. The stallion's eyes held intelligence far beyond any earthly creature, and when he looked at Emma, she saw something that defied explanation, recognition, perhaps even purpose. "Mrs. Chen is coming to visit tomorrow," Sarah said softly, watching Emma organize her stones into a perfect circle. Mrs. Chen lived in the apartment next door and had been bringing casseroles and offers of help since Sarah's diagnosis. She was kind, but she was also 73 years old and had no legal standing to care for a child. Emma looked up, her green eyes, so much like Sarah's own, bright with curiosity rather than fear. Will she bring more of those cookies with the jam inside? Probably. Sarah managed to smile. "Emma, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something important." But before she could continue, Emma scrambled off the bed and pressed her small hands against the window. "Mama, look!" Sarah followed her daughter's gaze, and her breath caught in her throat. There, at the edge of the hospital parking lot, where the asphalt met the tree line, stood the white stallion. Even in broad daylight, he seemed to glow with an inner light that made him unmistakable among the ordinary cars and concrete. "He followed us here," Emma whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I told you he wanted to help." Several people in the parking lot had stopped to stare at the magnificent creature, but he paid them no attention. His gaze was fixed on their window, on Emma's small figure pressed against the glass. Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her, as if the impossible was finally becoming possible. "What kind of help do you think he wants to give us?" Sarah asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Emma turned from the window, her expression serious beyond her years. "He wants to take care of me when you have to go away." The words hung in the air between them, honest and devastating, and somehow filled with hope all at once. The morning mist clung to the meadow like a gossamer veil as Sarah watched Emma sleep against Moonwhisper's warm flank. The stallion had barely moved through the night, his steady breathing creating a rhythm that seemed to lull both child and mother into a peaceful trance. Sarah's fingers traced the worn leather of her journal, the pages filled with letters she'd written to Emma for every birthday, every milestone, every moment she wouldn't be there to witness. A gentle nudge against her shoulder startled her from her thoughts. Moonwhisper's dark eyes held an intelligence that made her breath catch. Without words, she understood his message. It was time. "Emma, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning birdsong. "Wake up, little star." Emma stirred, her small hand reaching instinctively for her mother's face. When her eyes opened, they held the clarity of someone who had somehow processed the impossible during sleep. "Is it time, Mama?" Sarah's throat constricted. How could a 5-year-old understand what she herself could barely comprehend? "Yes, baby, it's time." They sat together in the dewy grass, Emma's head nestled against Sarah's shoulder while Moonwhisper grazed nearby, always keeping them within his watchful gaze. Sarah pulled out the journal and a small wooden box that had belonged to her grandmother. "These are letters," Sarah explained, her fingers trembling as she held the journal. "One for every year until you're grown up, and some extras for when you need me most." She paused, studying Emma's face. "Moonwhisper will know when—" Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "He talks, doesn't he? Not with words, but—" She pressed her hand to her chest. "Yes," Sarah breathed, amazed once again by her daughter's intuition. "He speaks to hearts." From the wooden box, Sarah withdrew a silver locket, simple, elegant, with an engraving of a crescent moon. Inside was a photo of them together and a small crystal that seemed to hold starlight within its depths. "This was your great-grandmother's. She told me it would find its way to someone who needed magic." As Sarah fastened the locket around Emma's neck, the crystal pulsed with a soft, warm light. Emma gasped, her eyes widening. "It feels like hugs, Mama." Moonwhisper approached then, lowering his great head until his muzzle nearly touched the ground before Emma. The gesture was unmistakably one of reverence, of an oath being sworn. Emma stood on unsteady legs and placed her small hands on either side of his face. "You'll take care of her," Sarah said, not a question, but a statement of absolute faith. "And she'll take care of you." The stallion's eyes shifted to Sarah, and in them she saw centuries of wisdom, of other souls he had guided through impossible passages. A warmth spread through her chest, not the false heat of fever, but something deeper, more profound. For a moment, the pain that had been her constant companion faded entirely. "Where will you take her?" Sarah asked. Images flashed through her mind, not her own thoughts, but Moonwhisper's gift. She saw rolling hills where wildflowers grew tall as Emma's shoulders, a crystal stream where she could splash and play, caves filled with gentle light where stories were written in shifting shadows on the walls. She saw other creatures, a red fox with knowing eyes, ravens that spoke in riddles, a family of deer that would teach Emma the language of the forest. Most importantly, she saw Emma growing, not just in size, but in power, in understanding, in a kind of magic that would prepare her for something greater than either of them could imagine. "It's not goodbye forever," Emma said suddenly, her voice carrying a certainty that seemed impossible for someone so young. "I can feel it. We'll see each other again." Sarah pulled her daughter close, memorizing the weight of her small body, the scent of her hair, the way she fit perfectly in the circle of her arms. "Yes, little star, when the time is right." They held each other as the sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and revealing the endless expanse of meadow that stretched toward distant mountains. Sarah felt her strength ebbing like tide, but with it came an unexpected peace. This wasn't the ending she had planned, but perhaps it was the beginning Emma needed. When Sarah finally loosened her embrace, Emma stepped back and took Moonwhisper's offered mane in her small fists. With impossible grace, the stallion helped her onto his back, where she settled as if she had been born to ride. "I love you, Mama," Emma called down, her voice strong and clear. "Thank you for giving me the best adventure." Sarah pressed her hand to her heart, feeling the echo of the crystal's warmth. "I love you too, forever and always." As horse and rider began to move across the meadow, Sarah closed her eyes and smiled, finally understanding that some bonds transcend even death itself. The morning light filtered through the stable windows in golden streams, casting dancing shadows across the hay-strewn floor. Emma sat cross-legged beside Moonwhisper, her small fingers carefully braiding wildflowers into his flowing mane. The stallion stood perfectly still, his luminous coat seeming to absorb and reflect the sunlight in ways that defied natural explanation. "Mama used to braid my hair like this," Emma whispered, her voice carrying the quiet reverence of shared secrets. "She said it made me look like a princess from the old stories." Moonwhisper lowered his great head, nuzzling her cheek with surprising gentleness. When he pulled back, Emma gasped. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw her mother's face reflected in his dark, knowing eyes, not as she had been in those final, pain-filled days, but as she was before, when laughter came easily and bedtime stories stretched long into the night. The vision lasted only seconds, but it left Emma with a warmth that spread from her chest to her fingertips. She didn't understand what she had seen, but something deep inside her recognized it as real, as true as the morning sun streaming through the stable doors. "You knew her, didn't you?" Emma asked, pressing her palm against the stallion's neck. "Before she got sick, before everything changed." The response came not in words, but in images that bloomed behind Emma's closed eyelids like photographs developing in darkness. She saw her mother as a young girl, no older than Emma herself, running through meadows thick with summer grass. The same white stallion galloped beside her, his hooves barely seeming to touch the ground. In the vision, Sarah's face was bright with wonder, her arms outstretched as if she could catch the wind itself. Emma's eyes snapped open, her heart racing. "That was Mama, wasn't it? When she was little like me?" Moonwhisper whickered softly, a sound that seemed to carry music within it. He moved toward the back of the stable, where shadows gathered in the corners despite the morning light. Emma followed without hesitation, her bare feet silent on the packed earth floor. In the furthest stall, partially hidden beneath a pile of old horse blankets, lay a wooden chest that Emma was certain hadn't been there the day before. The wood was pale and smooth, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. Moonwhisper nudged the chest with his nose, then stepped back, watching Emma with those impossibly deep eyes. With trembling fingers, Emma lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, were treasures that made her breath catch in her throat. A small leather journal bound with silver ribbon. A collection of pressed flowers, their colors somehow still vibrant despite their obvious age. And at the bottom, wrapped in silk that felt like whispered promises, a silver locket shaped like a crescent moon. Emma lifted the locket, feeling its weight in her palm. The clasp opened with the softest click, revealing two tiny photographs. On the left was her mother as a child, grinning with missing front teeth and windswept hair. On the right was a picture Emma had never seen before, herself as a baby, cradled in her mother's arms, both of them bathed in moonlight. "She planned this," Emma breathed, understanding flooding through her with startling clarity. "Mama knew about you. She knew you would take care of me." The journal fell open in her hands to a page covered in her mother's familiar handwriting, though the letters seemed younger somehow, written with the careful precision of a child learning to form words. "Out today, I met the most wonderful horse in the whole world. He told me his name without speaking, and I told him mine. He promised that someday when I really need him, he'll come back. I hope that day never comes, but if it does, I won't be afraid. Magic is real, and it's on my side. Yoe. Tears blurred Emma's vision as she read the words again and again. Beneath them, in different ink and an older hand, her mother had written something else. "Or for Emma, my brave girl, when the time comes, trust in what your heart knows to be true. Love is the strongest magic of all, Dadie." Emma clutched the journal to her chest, feeling the last pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving click into place. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. She had entrusted her to the same magical guardian who had watched over her own childhood dreams. Moonwhisper stepped closer, his warm breath stirring the loose curls around Emma's face. When she looked up at him, she no longer saw just a horse, no matter how extraordinary. She saw a keeper of promises, a bridge between worlds, a guardian whose duty transcended the boundaries of the ordinary world. "What happens now?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The stallion turned toward the stable doors, where the morning light beckoned with the promise of adventures yet to unfold. The morning mist clung to the meadow like a whispered promise as Emma stirred beneath the shelter of ancient oak branches. Moonwhisper stood sentinel nearby, his pearl-white coat catching the first tentative rays of sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. The stallion's ears twitched at every sound. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of a meadowlark, the soft murmur of Emma's awakening breath. Emma's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment confusion clouded her small features. The familiar ceiling of her bedroom was gone, replaced by a living tapestry of green leaves and dappled light. Then memory crashed over her like a cold wave, and her bottom lip began to tremble. Moonwhisper lowered his magnificent head, his dark eyes reflecting an understanding that seemed impossibly deep. When he exhaled softly against her cheek, Emma felt something she couldn't name, a warmth that seemed to flow from somewhere beyond the physical world, settling into the hollow spaces that grief had carved in her small chest. "She's not coming back, is she?" Emma asked, reaching up to touch the stallion's velvet muzzle. "Mama said you'd take care of me now." The horse's response came not in words, but in a gentle nudging that encouraged her to sit up. As Emma moved, she noticed something extraordinary happening around them. Where Moonwhisper's hooves had touched the earth during the night, tiny flowers had bloomed, delicate white blossoms that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Emma gasped, her grief momentarily forgotten in wonder. "How did you do that?" Moonwhisper stepped carefully around the magical blooms, each movement deliberate and graceful. He paused beside a patch of wild strawberries, lowering his head to indicate the ripe fruit hanging heavy on their stems. Emma's stomach growled in response, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday. As she gathered the sweet berries, Emma found herself talking to her mysterious guardian. Mama used to make strawberry pancakes on Sunday mornings. She'd let me help flip them, even though I always made a mess. Her voice caught slightly. She said messes were just love made visible. The stallion listened with an attention that felt almost human, occasionally nickering softly, as if in response to her words. When Emma had eaten her fill of berries, Moonwhisper began walking deeper into the forest, looking back expectantly until she followed. The path they traveled seemed to shimmer with possibility. Ancient trees towered overhead, their branches intertwining to form a natural cathedral. Shafts of golden sunlight illuminated patches of moss, so green they looked like emeralds scattered across the forest floor. Emma noticed that wherever Moonwhisper stepped, the very air seemed to hum with energy. "Are you magic?" she asked, hurrying to keep pace with his measured stride. "Mama said there was real magic in the world, but grown-ups forget how to see it." As if in answer to her question, they emerged into a clearing where impossible things seemed perfectly natural. A crystal-clear stream wound through the space, its water singing as it flowed over smooth stones. But this was no ordinary brook. The water itself seemed to glow with an inner radiance, and when Emma knelt to cup some in her hands, it tasted like liquid starlight. Moonwhisper drank deeply from the stream, and Emma watched in amazement as his white coat seemed to brighten, taking on an almost ethereal luminescence. When he lifted his head, droplets of the magical water clung to his whiskers like diamonds. "This place feels different," Emma said, settling onto the soft grass beside the stream. "It feels safe." For the first time since her mother's death, the crushing weight of loneliness lifted slightly from her shoulders. Here, in this enchanted clearing with this mystical creature, she felt held by something larger than grief, embraced by a force that whispered of connections deeper than blood, bonds stronger than death. Moonwhisper settled beside her, his large form providing both shelter and comfort. As Emma leaned against his warm flank, she felt her mother's presence in the gentle rhythm of his breathing, heard her lullabies in the whisper of wind through leaves. "Will you teach me about the magic?" Emma asked sleepily, her small hand resting on the stallion's neck. "Will you show me how to be brave like Mama was?" Moonwhisper's response came as a vision that bloomed behind Emma's closed eyelids. Images of soaring through starlit skies, of speaking with creatures of legend, of discovering powers she never knew she possessed. But beneath it all was a deeper promise, that love transcends the boundaries between worlds and that some bonds can never truly be broken. As Emma drifted towards sleep in the magical clearing, Moonwhisper began the first of many lessons. His ancient wisdom flowed into her dreams, planting seeds of understanding that would bloom in the days to come. The real adventure was just beginning. The morning mist clung to the meadow like whispered secrets as Emma stirred in the shallow cave where Moonwhisper had sheltered her through the night. The stallion stood sentinel at the entrance, his silver coat catching the first rays of dawn that filtered through the ancient oaks. His dark eyes, wise beyond measure, watched the forest with an alertness that spoke of centuries spent guarding precious things. Emma's small fingers clutched the worn fabric of her mother's scarf, the only tangible piece of Sarah she had left. The child's breathing was steady now, no longer hitched with the desperate sobs that had racked her tiny frame the day before. In sleep, she looked impossibly fragile. Her blonde curls matted against her flushed cheek, her rosebud lips slightly parted. Moonwhisper turned his great head toward her, and in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The air around them shimmered, taking on an opalescent quality that seemed to bend reality itself. Images began to form in the dancing light. Not quite solid, not quite dream. They were memories, but not Emma's memories. They belonged to the stallion, to ages long past when the world was younger and magic flowed as freely as mountain streams. He saw himself as a colt, running beside a woman with hair like starlight and eyes the color of deep forest pools. She was one of the first guardians, chosen by powers older than human civilization to protect the sacred bonds between all living things. Her name had been Lirale, and she had taught him that love was not bound by the constraints of form or species, that souls could recognize each other across any divide. The memories shifted, showing him standing vigil over other lost children through the centuries. A boy whose village had been consumed by plague. Twin girls whose parents had perished in a landslide. Each time he had felt the pull, the cosmic tug that drew him to those whose hearts were breaking but whose spirits still burned bright with possibility. Each time he had learned something new about the mysterious alchemy that could transform grief into strength. Emma stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment she lay perfectly still, taking in her surroundings with the careful assessment that children develop when their world has been turned upside down. Then she saw Moonwhisper, and instead of fear, something like recognition flickered across her features. "You're the horse from my dreams," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying but filled with wonder. "Mama told me about you." Moonwhisper approached slowly, lowering his magnificent head until his velvety muzzle was inches from her face. Emma reached out tentatively, her small hand disappearing into his silky forelock. At her touch, warmth spread through both of them. Not just physical warmth, but something deeper, more fundamental. It was the warmth of connection, of understanding that transcended words. "She said you would take care of me," Emma continued, sitting up and pressing her face against his neck. "But I don't understand why she had to go away. I was good. I helped her take her medicine. I didn't complain when she was too tired to read stories." The stallion's heart ached with an ancient pain. He had witnessed this confusion countless times, the way children blamed themselves for forces beyond anyone's control. If he could speak in words she would understand, he would tell her that love sometimes means letting go, that her mother's choice had been the ultimate act of devotion. Instead, he did what he could do. He shared his warmth, his presence, his unwavering commitment to her well-being. A rustle in the underbrush caught his attention. A red fox emerged from the ferns, followed by a badger and a family of rabbits. They arranged themselves in a semicircle around the cave entrance, their usual wariness replaced by something that looked remarkably like reverence. Emma gasped in delight, momentarily forgetting her sorrow. "They're not afraid," she marveled, watching as a bold squirrel scampered right up to Moonwhisper's hooves. The stallion nickered softly, a sound that seemed to ripple through the gathering animals. This was part of his gift, part of what made him more than just a horse. In his presence, the natural world remembered its original harmony, the time before fear had built walls between species. The animals sensed what Emma was only beginning to understand, that she was under the protection of something extraordinary. As the sun climbed higher, painting the meadow in shades of gold and green, Emma stood on unsteady legs. She was hungry and thirsty, and her dress was wrinkled from sleeping on the ground, but something had shifted in her young heart. The crushing weight of abandonment had begun to transform into something else, not acceptance, not yet, but the first tentative stirrings of trust. Moonwhisper moved to her side, and without hesitation, Emma grasped his mane and pulled herself onto his back. The action felt as natural as breathing, as if she had been born to ride among the clouds on the back of a creature made of starlight and dreams. The morning mist clung to the meadow like whispered secrets, as Emma stirred from her sleep, nestled against Moonwhisper's warm flank. The great stallion had remained motionless through the night, his breathing deep and steady, creating a rhythm that had lulled the child into peaceful dreams. As consciousness slowly returned, Emma felt the unfamiliar sensation of dewdrops on her skin and the earthy scent of wild grass filling her nostrils. Moonwhisper sensed her awakening and turned his magnificent head toward her, his silver eyes reflecting the early dawn light. There was something different about him this morning. An ancient wisdom seemed to shimmer just beneath the surface of his gaze, as if the night had awakened memories that had long slumbered. "I'm hungry," Emma whispered, her small voice barely audible above the gentle rustling of leaves. She had never experienced true hunger before, not the kind that gnawed at her belly and made her feel hollow inside. At home, breakfast had always appeared as if by magic, prepared by her mother's loving hands. The stallion rose gracefully to his feet, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his pristine coat. He lowered his head and gently nudged Emma upright, then began walking toward the edge of the meadow where a crystal-clear stream babbled over smooth stones. Emma followed, her bare feet silent on the soft grass, instinctively trusting this magnificent creature who had become her guardian. At the water's edge, Moon Whisper showed her how to cup her hands and drink from the stream. The water was sweeter than anything Emma had ever tasted, seeming to carry within it the essence of mountain snow and summer rain. As she drank, she noticed how the stallion watched her with protective intensity, his ears constantly swiveling to catch any sound that might signal danger. When her thirst was satisfied, Moon Whisper led her to a grove of berry bushes heavy with ripe fruit. The berries were unlike any Emma recognized, deep purple with an almost ethereal glow, hanging in clusters like tiny lanterns. The stallion carefully selected a low-hanging bunch and used his teeth to lower it within Emma's reach. The berries burst with flavor on her tongue, sweet and nourishing in a way that seemed to feed not just her body, but her very spirit. As she ate, Emma began to feel a strange, tingling sensation, as if the fruit contained some kind of magic that was slowly awakening something within her. "Moon Whisper," she said, the name feeling natural on her lips, though she couldn't remember learning it. "Where are we going?" The stallion's response came not in words, but in images that suddenly bloomed in Emma's mind. She saw towering mountains capped with snow, hidden valleys where flowers grew in impossible colors, and ancient trees whose roots ran so deep they touched the very heart of the earth. She saw other creatures too, wise owls with eyes like stars, deer that seemed to be made of moonlight, and butterflies whose wings carried the patterns of forgotten constellations. Most importantly, she sensed a destination, a place where answers waited, where the choice her mother had made would begin to reveal its true purpose. It was a sanctuary older than human memory, where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds grew thin. As they continued their journey, Emma noticed changes in the landscape around them. The ordinary countryside was gradually giving way to something more mystical. The trees grew taller and more twisted, their bark shimmering with an inner light. Flowers bloomed in shades that had no names, and the very air seemed to thrum with an energy that made Emma's skin tingle. Birds unlike any she had seen in picture books began to appear. Creatures with feathers that shifted color like oil on water, whose songs carried melodies that seemed to speak directly to her heart. They showed no fear of Moon Whisper, often landing on his back or flying alongside them as if serving as guides or guardians. As the day progressed, Emma found herself changing too. Her steps became lighter, more sure, and she discovered she could sense things she had never noticed before. The emotions of small animals hidden in the underbrush, the whispered conversations of the wind through the leaves, the ancient stories carved into the bark of the oldest trees. When evening approached, they reached a clearing dominated by a single, enormous oak tree whose trunk was so wide that Emma couldn't see around it. The tree's branches stretched impossibly high, disappearing into the twilight sky, and its roots created natural shelters and seats around its base. Moon Whisper led her to a hollow between two massive roots, a space that seemed perfectly designed for a small child to rest safely. As Emma settled into this natural bed, she realized that her fear had completely disappeared. In its place was a growing sense of wonder and purpose, as if she was exactly where she needed to be. The stallion settled beside her once again, and as the stars began to appear overhead, Emma felt a deep certainty that tomorrow would bring them closer to understanding why her mother had made such an impossible choice. The morning mist clung to the meadow like whispered secrets as Emma stirred beneath the canopy of ancient oak leaves. She had grown accustomed to waking with dewdrops kissing her cheeks and the gentle rhythm of moon whispers breathing nearby. 3 weeks had passed since her mother's departure, though time moved differently here in this enchanted realm between worlds. Emma sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and immediately sought the reassuring sight of her guardian. Moonwhisper stood silhouetted against the dawn, his silver mane catching the first rays of sunlight like spun starlight. But something was different today. His posture held a tension she had never seen before, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as if catching a scent that troubled him deeply. "Moonwhisper?" Emma's small voice carried across the clearing. "What's wrong?" The stallion turned to her, and in his ancient eyes she saw a flicker of something that made her stomach twist with unease. Without words, he approached and gently nuzzled her shoulder, but his usual warmth felt strained, distracted. As if summoned by her concern, the air around them began to shimmer. The familiar tinkling of wind chimes announced Lumina's arrival, but the fairy's usual radiant glow seemed dimmed, her gossamer wings beating with urgent purpose. "Little star," Lumina's voice held none of its typical musical lightness. "We need to talk." Emma scrambled to her feet, instinctively moving closer to Moonwhisper's protective bulk. "Is it about Mama? Is she—" "Your mother lives," Lumina said quickly, her tiny hands gesturing for calm. "But the balance has been disturbed. There are forces stirring that threaten the sanctuary we've created here." Moonwhisper lowered his great head, and Emma heard his voice like distant thunder in her mind. A darkness that claimed your mother's body was not content to simply take her life. It seeks to follow the bonds of love that connect you both. Emma's lower lip trembled. She didn't fully understand the words, but the fear in them was unmistakable. "What does that mean?" Lumina alighted on a nearby stone, her expression grave. "Your mother's love for you burned so brightly that it created a beacon, a pathway between worlds. The cancer that ravaged her body was more than mere disease. It was touched by shadow magic, an ancient corruption that feeds on despair and seeks to spread its influence." "But Mama's gone," Emma whispered. "She can't get sick anymore, can she?" "No, little one." Moonwhisper's mental voice wrapped around her like a gentle embrace. "But the shadow remembers the taste of her sorrow, and now it hungers for yours. It knows where you are." As if his words had summoned it, a chill wind swept across the meadow. The flowers that had bloomed in eternal spring began to wither at their edges, and the sky, so recently painted with dawn's promise, darkened with unnatural clouds. Emma pressed against Moonwhisper's warm flank, her small hands gripping his mane. "I don't want to be sick like Mama was." "You won't be," Lumina declared with fierce determination. "We won't let that happen. But we need to move you to a deeper sanctuary, a place where the shadow cannot reach." Moonwhisper's muscles tensed beneath Emma's touch. "Ether Heart Grove. We must reach it before the darkness grows stronger." "The Heart Grove?" Emma looked between her guardians, confusion mixing with growing fear. Lumina's glow began to intensify as she drew upon her magic. "It's a sacred place, older than memory, where the first bonds between human hearts and nature were forged. If we can get you there, you'll be protected by powers that predate the shadow by eons." A low rumble echoed across the meadow, like distant thunder but wrong somehow, too rhythmic, too purposeful. The withering at the flower edges began to spread, creeping toward them in visible waves. "It's found us," Moonwhisper said, his mental voice tight with urgency. "I climb onto my back, little one. We must fly." Emma had ridden on Moonwhisper's back many times over the past weeks, but never had she felt the coiled power in his muscles as she did now. As soon as she settled between his shoulders, gossamer wings unfurled from his sides, wings that caught the fading light like captured moonbeams. "Hold tight to his mane," Lumina instructed, her own form blazing brighter as she prepared to shield them. "And whatever you see behind us, don't look back." Emma buried her face in the silver strands of Moonwhisper's mane as his hooves left the ground. The sensation of flight was both terrifying and exhilarating, but beneath her wonder lurked the knowledge that something dark pursued them, something that wanted to steal the light from her world just as it had stolen her mother. As they soared over the treetops toward an uncertain destination, Emma whispered a prayer to the wind. "Please keep Mama safe, wherever she is, and please don't let the bad thing catch us." Behind them, the shadow's hunger grew. The morning mist clung to the meadow like gossamer threads, and Emma woke to find Moonwhisper standing sentinel beside the ancient oak where she had curled up against his warm flank. 3 days had passed since they'd begun their journey deeper into the mystical realm, and each dawn brought new wonders that made her mother's world seem increasingly distant. "Good morning," she whispered, pressing her small hand against the stallion's neck. His silver mane shimmered with an otherworldly light, and when he turned his luminous eyes toward her, Emma saw something that made her breath catch. Tears, crystalline and bright, sliding down his noble face. Moonwhisper lowered his great head until his muzzle touched her forehead, and suddenly Emma's mind filled with images that weren't her own. She saw her mother as a young woman, laughing as she ran through this very meadow, her dark hair streaming behind her like a banner. She saw Sarah's hands, small and eager, reaching up to stroke Moonwhisper's neck, just as Emma did now. "Mama knew you," Emma breathed, the realization flooding through her with startling clarity. "She was here before." The stallion's response came not in words, but in a gentle nudging motion toward a path that wound between 2 standing stones Emma hadn't noticed the night before. These weren't ordinary rocks. They hummed with an energy that made the air itself seem to dance, and strange symbols carved into their surfaces glowed with soft blue light. As they passed between the stones, Emma felt a tingling sensation wash over her, as if she were stepping through a waterfall of starlight. The world beyond was different somehow, more vivid and alive. Flowers turned their faces toward her as she passed, their petals unfurling in greeting. A family of foxes with coats that sparkled like copper pennies watched from beneath a hawthorn bush, their intelligent eyes following her progress with what looked remarkably like approval. "This is the heart realm," came a voice, melodious and warm. Emma turned to see a woman emerging from behind a curtain of weeping willow branches. She was tall and graceful, with silver hair that seemed to move with its own wind and eyes the color of deep forest pools. Her dress appeared to be woven from moonbeams and morning dew. "I'm Lirali, keeper of the sacred grove," the woman continued, approaching with steps that barely disturbed the carpet of luminous moss beneath her feet. "I've been waiting for you, little one." Emma instinctively moved closer to Moonwhisper, but felt no fear. There was something about Lirale that reminded her of the way hot chocolate tasted on a cold day, comforting and exactly right. "Moonwhisper has brought you here because there are things you must understand about your mother's gift," Lirale said, settling gracefully onto a moss-covered boulder that seemed to reshape itself to accommodate her. Sarah didn't simply stumble upon this realm by accident. She was chosen, just as you have been chosen. Emma's eyes widened. "Chosen for what?" "To be a bridge walker," Lirali explained, her voice taking on the cadence of an ancient story. "Every generation, one soul is born with the ability to move between worlds, to heal the rifts that sometimes appear between the realm of everyday life and the realm of magic. Your mother was one such soul." The woman gestured, and the air before her shimmered, forming images like a living tapestry. Emma watched in wonder as scenes unfolded. Her mother as a child, discovering a wounded fawn and somehow healing it with her touch. Teenage Sarah standing in this very grove, learning from a younger version of Lirali. Adult Sarah in a hospital room, using her gift to ease the pain of other patients even as her own body failed her. "But Mama got sick," Emma whispered, her voice small and confused. If she could heal others, why couldn't she heal herself? Lirale's expression grew infinitely gentle. "Because, dear child, your mother made the greatest sacrifice a bridge walker can make. She gave her remaining life force to ensure that you would be born with gifts even stronger than her own. The cancer wasn't something that happened to her. It was the price she willingly paid to pass her legacy to you." Emma felt hot tears spilling down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness alone. Mingled with her grief was a fierce pride, and a love so powerful it seemed to make her whole body glow with soft light. Moonwhisper stepped closer, and Emma felt his warmth enveloping her like the world's most perfect embrace. Through their connection, she sensed his own memories of Sarah. Decades of friendship, of shared purpose, of a bond that transcended the boundaries between human and magical being. "Will I see her again?" Emma asked, the question that had been burning in her heart finally finding voice. Lirali smiled, and when she did, flowers bloomed in her hair. "Oh, precious child, in ways you cannot yet imagine, you carry her with you always. And yes, when the time is right, all bridge walkers find their way home." The morning mist clung to the meadow like whispered secrets as Emma stirred against Moonwhisper's warm flank. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's departure, and the child had grown accustomed to waking with her face buried in the stallion's silken coat, his steady breathing her lullaby and alarm clock both. But today felt different. The air hummed with an energy that made the fine hairs on Emma's arms stand on end, and Moonwhisper's muscles were tense beneath her small hands. His dark eyes fixed on the tree line, where shadows moved with purpose, rather than the random dance of wind-blown branches. "What is it?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning breeze. Moonwhisper's response came not in words but in images that bloomed behind her closed eyelids. Figures in dark cloaks moving through the forest, their intentions sharp as winter frost. The Shadowkin had found them. For weeks, they had lived in peaceful isolation, their days filled with Emma's laughter echoing across the meadow as Moonwhisper taught her to speak with the wind and read the language of flowers. She had learned to call rain from clear skies and coax berries to ripen with her touch. But peace, Emma was learning, was often as fragile as morning dew. The stallion rose with fluid grace, lifting Emma gently onto his back. His thoughts pressed against her mind with urgent clarity. They had to leave, and they had to leave now. The Shadowkin fed on magic, drawing strength from mystical beings and the bonds between souls. They had sensed the growing connection between horse and child, and they hungered for it. Emma's small fingers twisted in Moonwhisper's mane as they began to move, his hooves silent against the soft earth. Behind them, the meadow that had been their sanctuary shimmered and began to fade, revealing itself to be one of Moonwhisper's protective illusions. The real landscape was wilder, more rugged, with ancient stones jutting from the earth like the bones of sleeping giants. As they crested a hill, Emma caught her first glimpse of their pursuers. They moved like smoke given form, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods, leaving only glimpses of pale hands and the suggestion of features that seemed to shift and blur when looked at directly. There were 7 of them, spread in a hunting formation that spoke of centuries of practice. Moonwhisper's pace increased, his powerful stride eating up the ground as they descended into a valley carpeted with silver grass that chimed like distant bells with each footfall. Emma felt his fear threading through their bond. Not for himself, but for her. The Shadowkin could drain him of his magic, reduce him to nothing more than an ordinary horse, but what they might do to a child touched by ancient power was something he refused to contemplate. The chase led them through landscapes that defied natural law, forests where the trees grew downward from clouds, their roots reaching toward a sky that rippled like water, streams that flowed uphill, carrying fragments of starlight in their currents, meadows where flowers sang in harmony with the wind. This was the true heart of the mystical realm, where the boundaries between dreams and reality had long since dissolved. Emma found herself laughing despite the danger, her fear transforming into exhilaration as Moonwhisper leaped over chasms that glowed with inner fire and galloped across bridges made of crystallized moonbeams. The magic in her blood sang in response to the wonders around them, growing stronger with each impossible sight. But the Shadowkin were relentless, their forms flowing over obstacles like oil, gaining ground with each passing moment. Emma could feel their hunger pressing against the edges of her consciousness, cold and vast and utterly alien. They whispered promises in voices like winter wind, power beyond imagining, knowledge that would make her a goddess among mortals, freedom from the pain of loss that still lived in the dark corners of her heart. For a moment, Emma wavered. The grief she carried for her mother was a constant ache, a hollow space where warmth and laughter used to live. The Shadowkin offered to fill that emptiness, to make her forget the pain of love and loss. All she had to do was let them in. Moonwhisper's thoughts crashed into hers like a wave, filled with images of Sarah's final moments, her fierce love and desperate hope as she entrusted her daughter to his care. The stallion showed Emma the truth, that grief was not weakness but the price of having loved deeply, and that the Shadowkin's gifts came with the cost of everything that made her human. Emma pressed her face against Moonwhisper's neck, feeling the wild thunder of his heartbeat. "I won't let them take us," she whispered, and meant it. The bond between them flared bright as a star, and suddenly Emma understood why the Shadowkin hunted them so desperately. Together, she and Moonwhisper were becoming something new, something that could stand against the darkness that crept at the edges of all worlds. The morning mist clung to the meadow like whispered secrets as Emma stirred from her sleep against Moonwhisper's warm flank. 3 weeks had passed since their desperate flight from the Shadow Realm, and though the immediate danger had faded, something fundamental had shifted in their bond. The stallion's silver coat bore new markings, spiraling patterns that seemed to pulse with inner light, remnants of the ancient magic he'd channeled to save them both. Emma traced one of the glowing symbols with her small finger, feeling warmth spread through her palm. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. Moonwhisper's great head turned toward her, his midnight eyes softer than usual. "They know, little star. They are memories made manifest. Stories written in starlight.ue." She didn't fully understand his words, but something in his tone made her chest feel tight. Over the past days she'd noticed changes in him. Moments when he'd stare into the distance, as if seeing worlds beyond her reach. Times when his responses came slower, as though he was listening to voices she couldn't hear. "Emma," he said now, his mental voice carrying an unusual weight, "there are things you must learn. About your mother, about why she chose me to watch over you." Emma's heart quickened. She'd been asking about her mama more frequently, the initial shock of separation giving way to a deep, persistent ache. Is she watching us somehow?" "In ways more real than you know." Moonwhisper rose gracefully to his feet, his hooves making no sound on the dewy grass. Come, there is a place I must show you." They traveled deeper into the whispering woods than ever before, past groves where the trees hummed with ancient melodies and streams that flowed upward in defiance of earthly laws. Emma rode securely on Moonwhisper's back, her small hands tangled in his mane, watching the world grow increasingly magical around them. Finally, they emerged into a circular clearing, dominated by a pool of water so still it might have been polished obsidian. Strange flowers bloomed around its edges, translucent petals that chimed softly in the breeze, their stems trailing wisps of luminescent fog. "This is the mirror of souls," Moonwhisper explained, stepping carefully to the water's edge. Here, the boundaries between worlds grow thin. Here, love transcends the limitations of flesh and time." Emma slipped down from his back, drawn to the pool despite her uncertainty. As she approached, the water began to shimmer, and suddenly she could see her reflection. But it wasn't quite right. Standing beside her mirror image was another figure, translucent but unmistakable. "Mama!" Emma's cry shattered the clearing's silence. Sarah's spirit form knelt beside the pool's edge, her hand reaching through the mystical barrier between worlds to almost touch her daughter's face. She looked exactly as Emma remembered. Warm brown eyes, gentle smile, the soft curve of her cheek, but surrounded by an ethereal glow that spoke of transformation beyond death. "Meme, brave girl." Sarah's voice came not through the air, but directly into Emma's heart. "He've been with you every step of the way. In Moonwhisper's strength, in the wind that guides your path, in the love that keeps you safe. Dot." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she pressed her palm against the water's surface. Where her skin touched the liquid, ripples of golden light spread outward. "I miss you so much. I don't understand why you had to go." "A death isn't an ending, sweetheart. It's a doorway. And love, true love, is the key that opens it." Sarah's spirit form turned to acknowledge Moonwhisper, who had bowed his great head in reverence. C chose Moonwhisper because he carries within him the essence of all mothers who have loved and lost, all guardians who have sworn sacred oaths. "He is my promise to you made manifest." Emma looked back at the stallion, seeing him with new eyes. The glowing markings on his coat weren't just magical symbols. They were bonds, connections to every soul he'd ever protected, every promise he'd ever kept. "Your mother's love flows through me now," Moonwhisper said gently, "not as a substitute for her presence, but as proof that such love never truly dies. It transforms, it transcends, but it endures." "Will I see her again?" Emma whispered. "Every day," Sarah promised. "In every act of kindness you show, every moment of courage you find, every choice you make with love instead of fear. And someday, when your own story in that world is complete, we'll be together again in ways that will make our earthly time seem like the briefest of dreams." The vision began to fade, but Sarah's final words rang clear: the trust in Moonwhisper, trust in yourself, trust in the magic that love creates. As the pool returned to ordinary water, Emma felt something settle in her chest. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of something stronger. Understanding, purpose, the knowledge that she was part of something far greater than herself. Moonwhisper nuzzled her shoulder gently. "You ready to continue our journey, little star?" Emma nodded, wiping her tears but feeling oddly strengthened. "Where are we going?" "Atto, discover what miracles love can work through a brave girl and her guardian." The crystal cavern hummed with ancient energy as Emma pressed her small palm against the luminescent wall. The moment her skin touched the smooth surface, the entire chamber erupted in brilliant light, and suddenly she could see everything, not just with her eyes, but with her heart. Moonwhisper stood beside her, his coat now radiating the same ethereal glow as the crystals. "Do you understand now, little star?" His voice echoed in her mind, gentle as always, but carrying the weight of eons. Emma nodded slowly, her eyes wide with wonder and a wisdom far beyond her years. She could see the threads now, golden strands of light that connected every living thing, stretching across time and space like an infinite web. Some threads pulsed with vibrant life, others flickered weakly, and some had been severed but left glowing stumps that yearned to reconnect. "Mama's thread," Emma whispered, reaching toward a particular strand that seemed to call to her. It was different from the others, not severed, but transformed, existing in a space between worlds where love transcended physical form. "Your mother chose to anchor herself here," Moon Whisper explained, his horn beginning to glow with the same soft light. When she realized her time was ending, she made a bargain with the ancient powers. She would give up her chance to move on, to rest, so that she could remain connected to you until you were ready. Emma's small fingers traced the golden thread, and suddenly she could feel her mother's presence as clearly as if Sarah was standing right beside her. Not the sick, tired mother from her final days, but the vibrant, laughing woman who had sung lullabies and chased away nightmares. "But the thread is fading," Emma observed, her voice carrying a gravity that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. "She's been holding on too long." "Yes," Moon Whisper confirmed, "and holding her here is causing ripples throughout the fabric of existence. The balance must be restored, or both worlds, yours and the realm beyond, will begin to unravel." Emma closed her eyes and let the knowledge flow through her. She could see it all now, how her mother's desperate love had created a tear in reality, how Moon Whisper had been tasked by forces older than memory to either mend it or watch everything crumble, how her own unique nature, born from the intersection of profound love and ancient magic, made her the only one who could set things right. "What happens to her if I let go?" Emma asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "She finds peace," Moon Whisper said softly. "She continues her journey to where souls go to heal and grow, and eventually choose their next adventure. She becomes part of something larger, while still remaining herself." "And what happens to me?" The great stallion lowered his head until his muzzle touched her shoulder. "You become who you were always meant to be, the bridge between worlds, the guardian of the balance. You grow up surrounded by love, not just from those who will care for you in the physical world, but from the knowledge that love itself is eternal and unbreakable." Emma opened her eyes and looked at the golden thread again. It pulsed weakly now, and she could sense her mother's exhaustion. Sarah had been fighting to stay connected for so long, pouring her essence into maintaining this impossible bond. "She's tired," Emma said, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "She needs to rest." "She needs your permission to go," Moon Whisper confirmed. "Your love is what's keeping her here. Only your love can set her free." Emma placed both hands on the crystal wall now, feeling the power thrumming through the stone and into her bones. The chamber filled with warm, golden light as she spoke to the thread, to her mother's lingering essence. "I love you, Mama," she whispered, her voice carrying across dimensions. "I love you so much that I'm going to let you go. I'm going to be brave, just like you taught me. I'm going to grow up and help people and make you proud. But you have to stop hurting yourself to stay with me. You have to go where you belong." The golden thread flared brilliant white for a moment, and Emma felt her mother's presence wrap around her like the warmest embrace. Then, slowly, gently, the thread began to transform. Instead of the desperate, clinging connection it had been, it became something pure and eternal. Not a chain binding Sarah to the world, but a bridge of love that would always exist between them. "Thank you, my brave girl," Sarah's voice whispered through the crystal chamber, already growing distant but filled with infinite peace. "Remember that love never really ends, it just changes form." The thread settled into its new configuration, strong but no longer straining against the natural order. Emma felt the shift in the very fabric of reality as the balance restored itself, the tear in existence healing with a sensation like a gentle sigh. Moon Whisper's coat gradually returned to its normal pristine white, though his eyes retained their ancient depth. "It is done," he said simply. "The worlds are whole again." The morning mist clung to the meadow like gossamer threads, and Emma felt the familiar tingle that preceded one of Moonwhisper's most important lessons. She had grown taller in recent months, her legs stronger from countless rides through the enchanted forest, her spirit more attuned to the ancient magic that flowed through this realm. Moonwhisper stood at the edge of the clearing where wildflowers bloomed in impossible colors, silver petals that chimed in the breeze, golden blooms that released tiny sparks of light. His coat shimmered with an otherworldly radiance, and when he turned to Emma, his eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. "Today, little star," his voice resonated through her mind with the warmth of summer rain. "You must learn about the bridges between worlds." Emma approached him without hesitation, her small hand finding its familiar place against his neck. The moment her skin touched his, the world shifted. Colors became more vivid. Sounds took on musical qualities, and she could feel the heartbeat of every living thing around them. "What kind of bridges?" she asked, though part of her already sensed the gravity of what was coming. Instead of answering with words, Moonwhisper began to walk toward a part of the forest Emma had never seen before. Ancient trees towered overhead, their trunks so wide that a dozen people holding hands couldn't encircle them. Carved into the bark were symbols that seemed to move and dance when she wasn't looking directly at them. They emerged into a circular grove where the air itself seemed to shimmer. In the center stood a pool of water so still it might have been polished obsidian. But as Emma drew closer, she realized it wasn't reflecting the sky above. Instead, images moved within its depths like scenes from a dream. "This is the seeing pool," Moonwhisper explained, his mental voice gentler than usual. "It shows what is, what was, and what may yet be. Your mother brought you here once, when you were very small." Emma's breath caught. She had fragments of memories from before, the scent of lavender, gentle hands braiding her hair, a voice singing lullabies in the darkness. But they felt like echoes of echoes, fading more each day despite her efforts to hold on to them. "I don't remember much about her anymore," Emma whispered, shame coloring her words. "Does that make me bad?" Moonwhisper lowered his great head until his forehead touched hers. "Love doesn't live in memory alone, little one. It lives in the choices we make, the kindness we show, the courage we find when others need us. Your mother's love flows through you like a river. You don't need to remember every drop to know it's there." The pool's surface rippled, and suddenly Emma could see a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands sitting beside a hospital bed. The woman was thin, fragile-looking, but her love blazed like a beacon as she watched a small girl sleep. "She stayed as long as she could," Moonwhisper continued. "But love sometimes means letting go, trusting that what we've given will be enough to guide those we leave behind." Emma felt tears on her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were something deeper, more complex. Recognition, perhaps, or gratitude for a sacrifice she was only beginning to understand. The image in the pool shifted, showing the same woman standing in this very grove, her hand on Moonwhisper's neck as Emma had done moments before. They were speaking, though no sound reached across the ears. The woman gestured toward something beyond the pool's edge, and Moonwhisper nodded with profound solemnity. "She asked me to teach you about both worlds, this one, where magic flows freely and anything is possible, and the other one, where humans learn to find magic in ordinary moments. She knew that someday you might need to choose between them." Emma's heart skipped. "Choose? The time for choosing isn't yet," Moonwhisper assured her quickly, "but it will come. When it does, you must understand that love isn't about holding on. It's about having the wisdom to know when to stay and when to go, when to keep and when to give." The pool's surface calmed, reflecting only their faces now. Girl and stallion, student and teacher, two souls bound by promises made in love and desperation. "Will you tell me about her?" Emma asked. "About who she was before I can remember?" Moon Whisper smiled, an expression that transformed his entire bearing. She was brave like you. She fought battles that would have broken stronger people. She loved stories, especially ones about magical horses and the children who rode them to adventure. As they made their way back through the forest, Emma felt something settling into place within her chest. Not quite memory, but something better, understanding. Her mother lived on not just in the fading echoes of the past, but in every choice Emma made, every act of courage, every moment of compassion. The bridge between worlds, she realized, wasn't made of stone or wood. It was made of love that transcended death itself. The morning sun cast long shadows through the ancient oak grove as Emma knelt beside the crystal-clear stream, her small hands cupped to catch the flowing water. 3 months had passed since she'd first arrived in this mystical realm with Moon Whisper, and the wild places had become as familiar to her as her mother's lullabies once were. "The water tastes different here," she said to Moon Whisper, who stood nearby, his silver mane catching the dappled sunlight. "It tastes like stories." The great stallion lowered his magnificent head, his breath warm against her cheek. "That is because this water carries the memories of all who have come before, little star. Each drop holds 1,000 tales of courage and love to you." Emma nodded solemnly, as if such explanations were perfectly reasonable. In this place, beyond the veil, where flowers sang at twilight and trees whispered secrets in languages older than mankind, magic was simply another word for home. But today felt different. There was a restlessness in the air, a trembling anticipation that made the very leaves seem to hold their breath. Moon Whisper had been unusually quiet during their morning walk, his usual playful spirit replaced by something deeper, more profound. "Moon Whisper," Emma said, settling cross-legged on a moss-covered boulder. "Why do you look sad today?" The stallion's eyes, ancient and wise, met hers with infinite tenderness. "I am not sad, precious one. I am preparing. There are things I must tell you, truths that your growing heart is ready to understand." Emma tilted her head, her dark hair falling across one shoulder. "About Mama?" "Yes, about your Mama, and about the choice that brought you to me." The child's eyes brightened with hope and pain intertwined. "Is she coming back? You said she might come back." Moon Whisper moved closer, his presence both comforting and solemn. "Your mother made the greatest sacrifice a soul can make, Emma. When the sickness threatened to take her from you, she refused to leave you alone in a world that might not understand your light. So she made a bargain with forces older than time itself." "What kind of bargain?" "She gave her mortal life willingly. Not to death, but to transformation. She became something new, something eternal, so that she could ensure you would never truly be alone. But such transformations, they take time to complete." Emma's small hands clutched at the moss beneath her. "I don't understand." The air around them began to shimmer, as if reality itself was preparing to shift. Moon Whisper's form seemed to glow from within, his white coat becoming almost translucent in the growing radiance. "Your mother did not die, little star. She became me." The words hung in the air like suspended starlight. Emma blinked, her young mind struggling to process the impossible truth, even as her heart seemed to recognize it instantly. "Mama?" she whispered. The great stallion's form began to change, silver light pouring from every fiber of his being. The magnificent creature who had protected her, taught her, loved her through these magical months, was dissolving into pure luminescence. But within that light, another shape was forming, familiar, beloved, achingly real. Sarah materialized slowly, as if stepping through a doorway between worlds. Her face was radiant with health, her eyes bright with tears of joy. The cancer that had ravaged her mortal form was gone, replaced by something timeless and beautiful. She wore a gown that seemed woven from moonbeams and starlight, and when she moved, the very air sang with music. "My darling girl," Sarah breathed, kneeling with arms outstretched. Emma launched herself forward, colliding with her mother's embrace with the force of months of longing. "Mama, I knew it! I knew you were still here!" Sarah held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her small body. "I never left you, sweetheart. I could never leave you. I just had to become something new, something that could bridge the worlds and keep you safe." "But you were Moon Whisper," Emma said, pulling back to study her mother's face with wonder. "You were the horse who taught me to speak with flowers and dance with the wind." "I was both," Sarah explained, smoothing her daughter's hair. "The ancient magic allowed me to take that form, to be your guardian and teacher while my true transformation completed itself. But now I can be your mother again, in a realm where sickness cannot touch us, and love is the only law that matters." Emma's face lit up with pure joy. "Does this mean we can stay together forever?" Sarah's smile was radiant as the dawn. "Forever and always, my precious girl. We have eternity to explore wonders beyond imagination, to learn and grow and love without fear." As mother and daughter held each other in the sacred grove, the ancient trees rustled their approval, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of mystical hoofbeats promised new adventures yet to come. The morning light filtered through the cabin windows like spun gold, casting dancing shadows across the wooden floor where Emma sat cross-legged, her small fingers tracing patterns in the dust motes that swirled in the sunbeams. Moon Whisper stood in the doorway, his massive frame filling the entrance, watching her with those ancient eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of centuries past. 3 months had passed since they'd arrived at this hidden sanctuary, and Emma had grown in ways that defied simple explanation. Her laughter came easier now, though it still carried traces of the profound loss that had shaped her young life. She spoke to Moon Whisper in whispers and gestures, and somehow, impossibly, he understood every word. "She's coming back today, isn't she?" Emma asked, not looking up from her invisible drawings. Her voice held a certainty that made Moon Whisper's ears prick forward. The stallion stepped closer, his hooves silent on the worn planks, and lowered his great head until his breath stirred the child's dark hair. Emma had been having the dreams again, vivid visions that came with the clarity of memory rather than the hazy confusion of sleep. In them, she saw her mother walking through fields of silver grass, her illness gone, her face radiant with a light that seemed to emanate from within. But these weren't dreams of the past or wishful thinking about an impossible future. They were something else entirely. The sound of approaching footsteps on the forest path made them both turn toward the open door. Emma scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs as a figure emerged from between the towering pines. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing, but she was transformed. The gaunt frame and hollow cheeks that had marked her final days were gone, replaced by a vitality that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. Her skin glowed with health, her eyes sparkled with life, and when she smiled, it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Mama?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper, afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter what could only be an impossible dream. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she dropped to her knees, arms outstretched. "My darling girl, my brave, beautiful Emma." The child ran then, her small legs carrying her across the clearing and into her mother's embrace. Sarah caught her and held her close, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body, marveling at how much she had grown in what felt like both an eternity and an instant. Moon Whisper watched the reunion with something that might have been satisfaction in his deep gaze. He had known this moment would come, had felt it approaching like the turning of seasons or the pull of tides. The magic that flowed through him was older than human understanding, connected to forces that bound souls together across impossible distances and through unthinkable circumstances. How? Emma pulled back to study her mother's face, her small hands framing Sarah's cheeks as if to prove she was real. "You were sick. You were—" "I was dying," Sarah said gently, not shying away from the truth they both knew. "But death isn't always the ending we think it is. Sometimes it's a doorway to something else, something more." She looked over Emma's head to where Moonwhisper stood, and in that exchange of gazes was an acknowledgement of mysteries that transcended ordinary understanding. The stallion had been more than guardian. He had been a bridge between worlds, a keeper of ancient knowledge about the bonds that connect souls across any distance. "The white stallion," Sarah continued, her voice soft with wonder. "He's been many things to many people over the centuries. Guardian, guide, protector of those who need him most. But for us, he was hope itself." Emma turned to look at Moonwhisper, and the great horse stepped forward, lowering his head so the child could wrap her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered against his mane. "Thank you for bringing her back." The stallion's response was a gentle nicker, and for just a moment, Emma could have sworn she heard words carried on the wind. "Love never truly dies, little one. It only transforms." As the day wore on, mother and daughter sat together in the grass outside the cabin, talking and laughing, sharing stories of their time apart. Emma told of her dreams and the lessons Moonwhisper had taught her about courage and patience. Sarah spoke of her journey through realms beyond ordinary sight, of healing that went deeper than flesh and bone, of discovering that some bonds are too strong for even death to break. When evening came, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Moonwhisper stood silhouetted against the forest edge, his white coat gleaming like captured moonlight. His work here was nearly done, and soon it would be time to move on to wherever the next lost soul awaited his protection. But for now, in this perfect moment, a family was whole again. The morning mist clung to the valley like a whispered prayer as Emma stood at the edge of the crystal pool, her small hand pressed against the smooth bark of the ancient willow. 3 months had passed since that terrible night when the shadow wraiths had nearly consumed everything, and the sanctuary bore new scars alongside its timeless beauty. But something else had changed too, something that made Emma's heart flutter with both hope and uncertainty. "She's coming back, isn't she?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of water against stone. Moonwhisper lifted his magnificent head from where he'd been drinking, droplets cascading from his silver muzzle like fallen stars. His ancient eyes, deep as winter seas, held a knowledge that transcended mortal understanding. "The veil grows thin, little star. Your mother's spirit has been walking a path between worlds, learning truths that few souls ever glimpse." Emma pressed her face against his warm flank, breathing in the scent of starlight and wild meadows that always surrounded him. "But will she remember me? Will she remember how much I love her?" A sound like distant thunder rumbled through Moonwhisper's chest, not menacing but profoundly gentle. "Love is the one force that death cannot diminish, child. It burns brighter than any star, flows deeper than any ocean. Your mother carries your love with her like a lantern in the darkness." The other mystical beings of the sanctuary had gathered without Emma noticing, drawn by the subtle shift in the air that spoke of approaching transformation. Luminara, the fox whose fur shimmered with captured moonbeams, padded silently to Emma's side. The ancient oak spirits rustled their leaves in a harmony that sounded almost like hushed voices sharing secrets. Even the normally elusive crystal butterflies descended from their hidden groves, their wings catching and reflecting light in patterns that seemed to pulse with anticipation. "Tell me the story again," Emma whispered, settling into the soft grass beside the pool. "About the bridge between worlds." Moonwhisper lowered himself gracefully beside her, his presence both protective and comforting. "Long ago, when the world was younger and magic flowed as freely as water, There existed places where the boundary between life and death became gossamer thin. This sanctuary is one such place, blessed by powers older than memory itself. His voice took on the cadence of ancient storytelling, words that had been spoken across countless generations. When a soul departs the mortal realm carrying great love and greater purpose, sometimes, only sometimes, they are granted a choice. They may continue on to whatever lies beyond, or they may return, transformed but not diminished, to complete what their earthly life left unfinished. Emma's eyes widened, hope blooming in her chest like spring flowers pushing through winter snow. And Mama had great love? The greatest, Luminara added, her voice like silver bells in a gentle breeze. Love for you that burned so fiercely it illuminated the dark spaces between stars. The guardians of the threshold could not ignore such radiance. As if summoned by their words, the air above the crystal pool began to shimmer with opalescent light. The water's surface, usually mirror-smooth, started to ripple in perfect concentric circles that seemed to emanate from some point far beneath its depths. The very atmosphere thrummed with an energy that made Emma's skin tingle and her heart race. Moon Whisper rose to his feet, his horn beginning to glow with the same ethereal light that danced above the water. "She comes," he said simply, but those two words carried the weight of destiny itself. Emma scrambled to stand, her small hands trembling as she clutched at Moon Whisper's mane. The light above the pool was growing brighter, taking shape. First just a suggestion of form, then something more substantial. The other creatures of the sanctuary pressed closer, forming a protective circle around the pool, their combined presence creating a barrier of pure benevolent energy. "Mama?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper, fragile as butterfly wings. The figure emerging from the light was Sarah, but transformed. Her form seemed to be woven from starlight and moonbeams, solid yet somehow luminous. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, and her eyes held depths that spoke of journeys through realms beyond imagination. She was beautiful in a way that transcended earthly beauty, not diminished by death, but elevated by it. But when she saw Emma, when their eyes met across the space between worlds, her transformed features softened into the same expression of infinite love that Emma remembered from countless bedtime stories and whispered lullabies. "My darling girl," Sarah said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Emma's very soul. "I promised I would never truly leave you." Emma took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was running toward the pool's edge where her mother waited. Behind her, Moon Whisper's horn blazed with protective light, ensuring that this reunion, this miracle born of love's refusal to surrender to death, would unfold safely within the sanctuary's blessed boundaries. The bridge between worlds had opened, and love had proven itself stronger than the grave. The crystalline chamber pulsed with an otherworldly light as Emma stood at its center, her small hand pressed against the heart of eternity. The ancient artifact hummed with power that seemed to recognize something deep within her, something that transcended her 5 years of mortal existence. Moon Whisper's silver form shimmered as he stepped closer, his luminous eyes reflecting centuries of wisdom. "The choice before you, little star, is one that even the oldest souls would tremble to make, but you carry within you something rare, a love so pure it can bridge the gap between worlds." Emma's fingers traced the intricate patterns carved into the crystal's surface, each touch sending ripples of light throughout the chamber. Images began to form in the air around them, visions of her mother lying in that sterile hospital bed, of the tears they'd shared, of the promises whispered in the dark. "Mama said she'd always be with me," Emma whispered, her voice carrying a strength that seemed impossible for someone so young. "But I can't feel her anymore. It's too quiet inside my heart." The stallion's breath misted silver in the charged air. "The heart can restore what was lost, child. It can bring her back, whole and healthy, as if the sickness never touched her. But such power demands a price. Around them, the other mystical guardians watched in solemn silence. The ancient spirits that had protected this realm for millennia understood the weight of the moment. They had seen countless souls face impossible choices, but never one so young carrying such a burden. "What kind of price?" Emma asked, though her eyes suggested she already knew the answer would be difficult. To wield the heart's power, one must anchor it with their own life force. Your mother could return, but you would take her place in the realm between worlds. You would become as I am, a guardian, eternal but bound to this sacred duty. Emma's lower lip trembled, but she didn't remove her hand from the crystal. Through the translucent walls of the chamber, she could see the mystical forest stretching endlessly, beautiful but separated from the world where children played and mothers sang lullabies. Would I remember her? Would I remember being Emma? Moon Whisper's expression softened with infinite compassion. You would remember everything, dear one. Every story she read to you, every song she sang, every moment of love you shared. But you would also carry the memories of all who came before, all who have served as guardians of this realm. The heart of eternity pulsed brighter, responding to Emma's emotional turmoil. She closed her eyes and felt something stirring within her. Not just her own small spirit, but an echo of something vast and knowing. Her mother's words returned to her with startling clarity. Sometimes being brave means making the hard choice, even when it hurts. "Moon Whisper," Emma said, opening her eyes with newfound resolve. "If I become a guardian, could I help other children who lose their mamas and papas? Could I make sure they're not alone like I was?" The stallion's eyes widened with something approaching awe. Even in this moment of ultimate sacrifice, the child's first thought was for others. "Yes, little star, that would be your sacred duty, to guide lost souls, to offer comfort to those who grieve, to be a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of spirit." Emma nodded slowly, understanding flooding through her with a wisdom beyond her years. She thought of all the children in hospital rooms like the one she'd sat in, watching their parents slip away. She thought of the loneliness that felt like drowning, and how desperately she had wished for someone who understood. "Then I won't be alone either," she said with growing certainty. "And neither will they." The heart of eternity began to sing, a sound like wind chimes made of starlight, like the first breath of dawn, like a mother's lullaby carried on an impossible breeze. The light within it swirled and condensed, taking on a familiar shape that made Emma's breath catch. There, shimmering within the crystal, was her mother's face. Not as she had been in those final days, ravaged by illness, but radiant and healthy, her eyes bright with love and fierce with pride. "My brave girl," Sarah's voice whispered from within the heart, somehow reaching across the veil between worlds. "You don't have to save me, sweetheart. You just have to save yourself." But Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, even as she smiled. "I'm not saving you, Mama. I'm choosing to love like you taught me. I'm choosing to be bigger than my own hurt." She pressed both hands against the heart of eternity, feeling its power surge through her small frame. The chamber filled with blinding light as ancient magic recognized a soul worthy of its greatest gift. Not the power to bring back the dead, but the courage to transform loss into service, grief into guidance, and love into legacy. The morning sun painted golden streams through the cottage windows as Emma carefully braided wildflowers into Moon Whisper's silvery mane. Her fingers, once so small and uncertain, now moved with practiced confidence as she wove daisies and forget-me-nots between the strands. The stallion stood perfectly still, his ancient eyes soft with contentment as the girl hummed a melody that seemed to float on the spring breeze. "There," Emma said, stepping back to admire her work. "You look beautiful for today." Moon Whisper lowered his great head and nuzzled her cheek, his breath warm against her skin. Though no words passed between them, Emma understood. Today was special. Today, everything would change. 3 years had passed since Sarah left her daughter in the mystical stallion's care. 3 years of wonder and growth in the hidden valley, where time moved differently and magic still breathed in every blade of grass. Emma had learned to speak with the wind, to read the stories written in cloud formations, and to understand the deep wisdom that flowed between all living things. But most importantly, she had learned that love transcends every boundary, even death itself. "She's coming back, isn't she?" Emma whispered, pressing her forehead against Moonwhisper's neck. The stallion's response came not in words, but in the sudden shimmer of light that began to dance across the meadow. The air itself seemed to sing as particles of starlight gathered and swirled, forming a luminous pathway that stretched from the ancient oak tree to where they stood. Emma's heart raced as a figure began to materialize within the light. At first, it was just a suggestion of movement, a whisper of familiar warmth. Then, slowly, Sarah stepped through the veil between worlds, her form solidifying with each breath until she stood before them, radiant and whole. "Mama!" Emma cried, running toward her mother with arms outstretched. Sarah caught her daughter and lifted her high, spinning in circles as tears of pure joy streamed down her face. "My beautiful girl," she sobbed, holding Emma close. "My brave, magnificent daughter." Emma pulled back to study her mother's face, her small hands tracing the beloved features. Sarah looked exactly as she had 3 years ago, but different too. There was a peace in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a serenity that spoke of journeys taken and wisdom gained. "I missed you every single day," Sarah whispered. "But I could see you, sweetheart. I watched you grow and learn and become this incredible person. I'm so proud of you." "Moonwhisper taught me so many things," Emma said, glancing back at the stallion who watched their reunion with quiet satisfaction. "He taught me about the music in the stars and how to listen with my heart, and he told me stories about you when you were little." Sarah turned to the mystical creature who had given up so much to care for her child. Moonwhisper had aged in these 3 years, silver now threading through his coat, but his eyes still held the same ancient kindness that had convinced her to trust him with her most precious gift. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing that no words could truly express the depth of her gratitude. "Thank you for keeping her safe, for teaching her, for loving her." Moonwhisper stepped forward and touched his muzzle to Sarah's hand. In that contact, understanding passed between them, a recognition of the sacrifice they had both made and the love that had made it possible. "What happens now?" Emma asked, looking between her mother and her guardian. Sarah knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Now we have a choice to make together. I can stay here in this magical place, or—" She paused, glancing at Moonwhisper, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Or we can return to the world beyond the valley. I've been given that gift, the chance to live again, to raise you, to be your mother in all the ways I dreamed of." Emma's face lit up with wonder. "Really? We can go home?" "If that's what you want," Sarah said. "But know that leaving here means leaving behind some of the magic. The world outside doesn't always believe in miracles." Emma considered this seriously, then looked at Moonwhisper. "Will you come with us?" The stallion shook his great head gently, and somehow Emma understood. His place was here, in this realm between worlds, caring for other lost souls who might need guidance. "Then we'll visit," Emma declared, with the firm conviction of a child who had learned that love never truly ends. "We'll come back and tell you about everything we see and do." As the three of them stood together in the golden morning light, the valley itself seemed to pulse with approval. They had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, and in doing so had proved that some bonds are stronger than death, deeper than magic, and more enduring than time itself. The greatest adventure was just beginning.